Hi, this is Michael from the Audible Local Ledger reading the Providence Journal for Thursday, May 1st. First, the weather. For today, May 1st, there'll be clouds and sunshine with a high of 64 and a low of 49. For tomorrow, there'll be a shower and a thunderstorm with a high of 70 and a low of 55. For Saturday, May 3rd, a high of 72, a low of 53, with being cloudy and showers, perhaps. On Sunday, May 4th, there'll be showers possible with a high of 64 and a low of 48. On Monday, May 5th, showers are possible again with a high of 58 and a low of 43. In local news in the Providence Journal, Majority Leader Valerie Lawson is elected the new president of the Rhode Island Senate on April 29th. She succeeds Dominic Ruggiero, who died April 21st after a long battle with cancer. An article by Patrick Anderson and Catherine Gregg. In a week of change and turmoil at the Rhode Island Senate, Valerie Lawson's ascension to the Senate president with Senator Frank Ciccone as her top lieutenant promises more continuity than upheaval. Lawson is the most overtly left-leaning president in Senate history, but her choice to partner with the conservative Ciccone in a union-friendly leadership team will feel familiar to many Rhode Island State House watchers. A majority of Lawson's support in the Democratic caucus came from its moderate to conservative bloc, which will likely give those members more influence, particularly on cultural issues, than they would have had with competitor Ryan Pearson as the new president. The Lawson-Ciccone Senate might end up resembling the chamber under Ruggiero's predecessor, M. Teresa Paiva Weed, when Ruggiero was her second in command. The Senate under Ruggiero was already union-friendly, particularly to the laborers in the private sector construction unions. Lawson has given no indication she intends to give up her union job as president of the National Education Association, Rhode Island, as Ruggiero did with his own top-ranked job with the laborers when he became president. Lawson taking the top spot over Ciccone is likely to mean an even more hospitable climate for public sector unions and those in the service sector, such as healthcare workers. The House. A key objective for the new leadership team will be establishing negotiating position with the House as the end of the legislative session approaches. A key concern of Senate insurgents for the last 18 months has been that with Ruggiero ailing, the House has run roughshod over Senate priorities. As a former Senate Finance Chairman and former Majority Leader, Pearson made his experience negotiating with the House central to his presidency campaign. Lawson was not involved in the negotiations last year, and her relationship with House leaders is a bit unknown. Sometimes when new leaders take over, they take a tough line with the opposite chamber to solidify their position. That was the case when Ruggiero took over in 2017 and negotiations with the House over the state budget blew up, bringing an abrupt end to the legislative session. On gun legislation, for years the Ruggiero Senate served as a check on the most aggressive goals of the gun control advocates, and particularly a ban on so-called assault weapons. Lawson co-sponsored the Senate version of this year's assault weapons ban bill, and her elevation to president could increase the odds it might come to the floor for a vote. But Ciccone, a licensed gun dealer, does not support the assault weapons ban as it stands. On April 24th, the day his partnership with Lawson was announced, he said, quote, "If you change the definition of what an assault weapon is, I may not have a problem with the bill. I am open to it. If the bill gets to the floor, it could pass with or without his vote." Gambling legislation. In the policy realm, Ruggiero's absence may be felt the strongest in Rhode Island's casinos, where he championed expansion and maximizing gambling as a revenue source. Ruggiero also stood in the way of efforts to ban smoking at Bally's casinos in Lincoln and Tiverton. There's no sign that Lawson or Ciccone feel as strongly about it, and organized labor has come out in favor of ending smoking at the casinos. Ciccone has also sponsored legislation that would break International Game Technology's monopoly on the online sports betting in Rhode Island and allow up to 5 gambling companies' bids on launching apps here. What will Republicans get? A divided Democratic caucus and close leadership election would typically provide a rare opening for Republicans to exact some policy concessions in exchange for their votes. The 4 GOP votes were not enough to tip the Senate president race, and what the Republican caucus really wants, to kill assault weapons ban, is likely not on the table. Historically, while Republicans have been able to get a couple of bills through Democratic leadership by voting for a new leader, they have tended to be pretty small. Income tax rates. For years, Ruggiero, like House Speaker K. Joseph Shekarchi and Governor Dan McKee, was dead set against any increase in income taxes, even for the top 1% of earners. During most of the years, state coffers were full enough to ease pressure for any tax increase, but the fiscal picture this year is different. Shekarchi has said he can't rule out a tax increase this year, and Ruggiero's replacement with more liberal Lawson may increase the odds of that happening. End of article. Order to freeze funding challenged by Trump. An article by Katie Mulvaney in the Providence Journal. President Donald Trump's administration is appealing a court order barring the government from freezing billions of dollars in grants. The government on April 28 filed notice that it would appeal a ruling by U.S. District Court Chief Judge John J. McConnell, Jr. that granted a preliminary injunction to Rhode Island and other states and ordered the federal government to resume the flow of congressionally authorized funding that had been frozen by a series of executive orders signed by the president. Judge orders funding to resume. The lawsuit, brought by Rhode Island and close to 24 other Democratic states, is one of hundreds facing the Trump administration since he took office for a second term. On January 31st, McConnell granted a temporary restraining order against the funding freeze. 10 days later, he granted a request from the states to enforce the motion, ordering federal agencies to, quote, immediately restore frozen funding, end quote, and, quote, immediately end any funding pause, end quote. On March 6th, McConnell granted a more lasting preliminary injunction. Weeks later, a 3-judge panel with the First U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals rejected the federal government's request to overturn. Despite that ruling and the administration's unsuccessful appeal of it, the plaintiffs argue that payments obligated to the states have yet to be released. End of article. In other news, Rhode Island looks to benefit from the 2026 World Cup. Getting into the game, an article by Patrick Anderson to the Providence Journal. At the same time, the hospitality industry braces for a slowdown of international visitors this summer, Rhode Island leaders are preparing for an influx of foreign fans when the World Cup soccer tournament kicks off in 2026. Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts is one of 16 North American venues to hold the World Cup matches next June. And General Treasurer James Diossa wants to make sure Rhode Island takes advantage of an opportunity he estimates could be worth as much as $50 million in economic activity. Diossa is leading a working group of public and private sector leaders to plan and raise money for the event in Rhode Island. Quote, what we've done so far is we've had multiple meetings, folks with Emergency Management Agency, folks from tourism, commerce, the League of Cities and Towns, just to start thinking about the World Cup. What does this mean, Diossa said? How do you prepare municipal budgets for the potential number of visitors that are going to come to our state? The first step probably will be a request for money. On April 23rd, Diossa met with Governor Dan McKee about finding some in the state budget. Diossa thinks Rhode Island could use between 4 and 5 million of combined public and private funds for the World Cup. Quote, they will continue having conversations, as the OSA spokesman Wilda Arboleda said after the meeting on whether McKee is planning to ask lawmakers for funding. What will Rhode Island get out of a soccer tournament in Massachusetts? The biggest Rhode Island beneficiaries from large sporting events at Gillette Stadium tend to be the hotels in Providence that are slightly closer to Foxborough than downtown Boston and cheaper. Restaurants also get a boost. They also said the multi-week carnival nature of the World Cup could spread the benefits more broadly to Rhode Island businesses and attractions. To make the case for spending state money on planning for the tournament, DiAsa had Bryant University economist Edinaldo Tebaldi calculate the economic impact of the World Cup in Rhode Island based on the estimated effect of the Army-Navy college football game in December of 2023. The Army-Navy game was attended by 65,878 people and generated an estimated $3.1 million of economic activity in Rhode Island. Boston World Cup organizers estimate 450,000 people will watch 7 games in Foxborough, and Tebaldi projects that based on the Army-Navy results, the World Cup could generate between 25 and 30 million in direct economic activity. On top of that, there could be between 45.7 million and 54.8 million in indirect economic activity, inundated by soccer fans. But it won't all be parties and watching the money roll in. Earlier this month, Rhode Island Emergency Management Director Mark Pappas briefed the State Emergency Advisory Board on what government agencies might have to do to host several thousand boisterous soccer fans from around the globe. He told the group there's a possibility that in addition to the attendees' matches in Foxborough, Rhode Island could receive international visitors planning to watch their team play in New York and Philadelphia. If you look at the corridor between Boston, New York, and Philly, who are having all the games, we are sitting in the middle of that on the rail line and bus line and think that a lot of people will set up shop in Rhode Island and romp up and down whenever the games are played, which would overwhelm us on safety and security piece, overwhelm transportation, hotels, and hospitalities. We think we're going to get inundated with a large group of folks coming in to see those games, he added. While it may be a lot to manage, the tourism industry would probably welcome a horde of international visitors, with international travel to the United States this summer expected to drop due to the new stricter border entry policies. Will there be a big fan fest in Rhode Island? Officially speaking, Boston is the host for the World Cup matches in Foxborough, and there's a Boston 2026 host committee to work on event planning with FIFA, the international organization that runs the tournament. So big decisions will flow through Boston, including whether there will be an officially sanctioned fan festival in Providence. These fan fests typically have big screens showing matches in a central location. We don't know until probably the end of the year, DiAsa said, about whether there'll be officially sanctioned events in Providence. I think it'd be ideal to do it in Providence, connected to the water, fire, and different activities in the area. Either way, Mayor Brett Smiley has proposed $250,000 for World Cup preparations in his budget for next year. Asked specifically what the money would be spent on, city spokesman Michaela Antunes said it would go towards supporting safe activations here in Providence. As the event gets closer, the city is working to determine how the municipality can best support, while anticipating that local and regional events will likely draw thousands of visitors to the area, she wrote in an email. Quote, to prepare for that type of multi-week activation, the city is working across departments with state partners to better understand the event's impact in Providence and how we can bring people from across the globe to visit and enjoy our city. Will any teams train in Rhode Island? Before the games themselves, the teams competing in the World Cup need to practice somewhere, and at least 2 Rhode Island locations at the University of Rhode Island and the Bryant University have been considered as team bases. URI this year took itself out of consideration as a base when the scale of what would be required became clear. URI's decision not to move forward reflects a number of complex factors, including the timing of our new student orientation in June, longstanding commitments to host local high school graduations, and logistics related to major construction projects planned near the Ryan Center, said spokesperson Dawn Bergantino in an email. In addition, the terms outlined in the proposed contract present financial and logistical challenges that at this time are unable to confidently accommodate as a public land grant institution. The Journal is still awaiting an answer from Bryant as to whether it might still serve as a World Cup base. The World Cup is played on grass fields, so teams generally do not want to train on artificial turf like the field at the new Centerville Bank Stadium in Pawtucket. What would the state money be used for? DiOssa said funding could be used to help pay police overtime and public works staff, as well as to put on events. Getting fans from Providence to Foxborough is also on Rhode Island officials' agenda. The MBTA often runs special commuter trains to Gillette Stadium on the New England Patriots game days, and that would be an option for the World Cup transportation, but that would again be a decision made in Boston. DiOssa said that the Rhode Island Airport Corporation would likely be involved, although most international travelers will probably come through New York or Boston. In addition to DiOssa, the Rhode Island World Cup Working Group includes representatives from Rhode Island Commerce, Rhode Island Emergency Management, the Department of Transportation, the Providence Warwick Convention and Visitors Bureau, and the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns. End of article. In other news, Rhode Island names a new historian laureate, an article by Catherine Gregg. Providence, Rhode Island has a new historian laureate. On Tuesday, April 29th, Secretary of State Greg Amore announced that he had chosen Keith Stokes from among 8 candidates for the unpaid post that legislators created initially for real estate investor and historian Patrick Conley, who did not seek reappointment this year. Stokes, who is perhaps best known as the state's economic development director during the 38 Studios debacle, was appointed by Governor Dan McKee as the state's new $152,157 a year director of the Division of Equity, Diversion, and Inclusion within the Department of Administration in May of 2024. His new unpaid side gig as the state's historian laureate extends through April 2030. Quote, ensuring that Rhode Islanders learn about and continue to pass on our state's history is one of my top priorities as Secretary of State, Amore said when he made the announcement. I am confident that Keith's rich background and breadth of experience in historical research, storytelling, and education will continue to be an incredible asset to our state in this role. Quote, I am deeply honored and humbled, Stokes said. My mission is to interpret the state's history in a way that inspires hope for the future, fostering a sense of identity and purpose among all residents. As to why he was chosen for his new role, Amore cited Keith's passion for historical research, born of a heritage that grounds his roots in the land of Rhode Island, and his curiosity to learn more about his African, Jewish, and Caribbean family roots. He frequently appears on national historical programs, including on C-SPAN, Fox's Legend and Lies, and TED Talks. Recently, he was a lead researcher and an author of, quote, A Matter of Truth, a publication that examined and documented the role of the city of Providence and the state of Rhode Island in supporting a, quote, separate and unequal existence for African heritage people, indigenous people, and people of color. During the past 4 decades, Stokes has many roles, including executive director of the Chamber of Commerce in his hometown of Newport, where he was also a 3-term city councilman. He was a senior policy advisor to Governor Bruce Sunland, executive director of Omni Development Corporation, and a frequent national, state, and local lecturer in community and regional planning, historic preservation, and interpretation with an expertise in early African and Jewish American history. He has served on numerous boards, local, regional, and national business, including the Preservation Society of Newport County, Touro Synagogue Foundation, Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission, State Review Board, Rhode Island Black Heritage Society, Rhode Island Economic Development, Quonset Development Corporation, and Rhode Island Foundation and the American Antiquarian Society. Stokes will attend the Rhode Island Independence Day event at the Rhode Island State House on Saturday, May 3rd from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., and he will have a collection of publications and historical artifacts on display. Created in 2012, the unpaid position of Historian Laureate is honorific only. The holding of this position does not confer official status upon any historical writings, lectures, or pronouncements of the laureate, according to the Secretary of State. End of article. In other news, investigation into catalytic converter thefts uncovers elaborate scheme. An article by Mark Reynolds in the Providence Journal. It was 2021, and the market for precious metals was hot, drawing attention to catalytic converters on cars, trucks, and SUVs. Catalytic converters render engine exhaust pollutants into carbon dioxide and water vapor. The catalyst for the conversion itself, which happens through a chemical reaction, is a precious metal such as platinum, palladium, or rhodium. Why do thieves target catalytic converters? The average scrap price for converters ranged from $300 to $1,500 for a period of in 2021, and according to an FBI affidavit. The ease of stripping parts from cars and SUVs, as well as the difficulty of tracing stolen catalytic converters back to vehicles were removed from, was another incentive for lawbreakers. FBI accuses men of elaborate conspiracy in Rhode Island. Filed in the U.S. District Court, Providence, the 36-page affidavit accuses 3 men of participating in an elaborate conspiracy to rake in hundreds of thousands of dollars through the theft and sale of catalytic converters. Quote, thieves began to target vehicles for not only their rims and tires, but also for their catalytic converters, says the detail-rich FBI record. The affidavit also charts the role of a Providence-based company in the local trade for converters, or, quote, CATs. Converter thefts on a daily basis draw police attention in Cranston. Cranston police noticed the extensive and frequent catalytic converter theft in early 2022. Investigators identified a ring of thieves they believed to be responsible for stealing more than 7,000 converters, estimated at a total value of more than $2.4 million across New England, the FBI says. GPS data gathered by investigators shows that a particular rented Volkswagen Golf traveled from the location of one theft to another, 6 different locations altogether in Providence and Warwick in 2022. The FBI says also the timing of the June 22 visits to these locations fell within the time frame of thefts, according to the affidavit. The GPS data also showed that the same Volkswagen had parked outside a Providence business identified in the affidavit only as Company 1. That business is Accurate Converter, which purchases and used auto parts. Camera footage from inside the business shows suspect. And a surveillance photo from inside the business shows one of the 3 men who now faces charges, 27-year-old Luis Aceituno, standing at a table alongside of an array of converters, according to the affidavit. Aceituno is also standing next to an open garage door near the rear end of the gray Volkswagen Golf, which he got out of, the FBI says. Records kept at the business reflect the purchase of 12 converters and a payment of $4,675 at 3:05 p.m. on the afternoon of June 22nd. Acetuno is listed as the recipient of the payment, the FBI says. The sequence is one of several transactions presented in the affidavit, which says that Acetuno sold about 898 converters for $233,665 in 2022 and 1,230 converters for $466,070 in 2022. Investigators found he also sold 2,128 catalytic converters to the unnamed Providence company and received a total of $699,735, the FBI says. Politicians take action. Just days after the episode with the Volkswagen Golf in late June 22, Governor Dan McKee took action with the help from the Rhode Island General Assembly that would merit reference in the affidavit compiled by the FBI Special Agent Lise B. George. The new law required catalytic converter buyers to obtain either vehicle identification numbers or copies of registrations from the vehicles from which the converters were removed. It also mandated that buyers obtain a digital image of each seller's photo identification. In the meantime, the Cranston investigators realized that Acetuno and others were working extensively outside of Rhode Island. Cranston's police colonel Michael Winquist recalled on April 29th. It became readily apparent that he was working throughout New England, and we needed to switch to federal jurisdiction, Winquist said. The FBI entered the probe in February 2023. The major focus for investigators early on was Accurate Converter, which is in a plaza off Branch Avenue adjacent to Interstate 95. While the company is not identified by name in the affidavit, the property where it had been operating is shown in pictures in the file. The business was the site of a raid soon after the FBI entered the fray. Years before, the conspirators had come to know Company One as an outfit that bought converters without scrutinizing the people who were selling them, the FBI says. The company's employees, the FBI says, had purchased the parts without requiring photo identification or requiring documentation regarding particular vehicles that the converters had been removed from. This had changed by early 2023, and employees started to adhere to the new law, according to witnesses cited by the FBI. The catalytic converter thieves could not provide the necessary documentation for the stolen converters, the FBI says. In an email, the CEO of Accurate Converter, George Lucas, declined to comment on this situation, saying the company does not believe it would be appropriate, quote, in light of the pending court case against the three defendants, alleged conspirators charged in federal court. In recent days, Acetuno and two other men accused in the conspiracy were charged in federal court. Acetuno faces counts of interstate transportation of stolen property in excess of $5,000, conspiracy to commit that same offense, and willfully subscribing to a false or fraudulent tax return or other documents. Acetuno was released on personal recognizance after he made his initial appearance. Another co-defendant was released to home detention with GPS monitoring, and a third defendant in the case has already been detained in an unrelated matter. Catalytic converter thefts once took place on a daily basis in Cranston, but now such thefts are a rare occurrence. End of article.